Finland just opened the door to NATO nukes. Putin did this. Finland just took one of the biggest steps in its modern military history, and it did it in the least flashy way possible. It didn't acquire nuclear weapons. It didn't ask NATO to park warheads in Lapland next to Santa's workshop and a reindeer with a security clearance. It didn't suddenly become a nuclear power, and under the proposal now moving through its political system, Finland still couldn't manufacture or detonate nuclear weapons. What Finland did was quieter, more technical, and in some ways more important. It changed the law, and in deterrence, the law can matter just as much as the missile, because deterrence doesn't only live in submarines, bombers, silos, and classified NATO planning rooms. It also lives in what a country can legally do when the situation goes sideways. Finland is preparing to remove a Cold War-era legal ban that made it impossible to import, transport, possess, or handle nuclear weapons on Finnish territory. That law was written in 1987 when Finland was not in NATO, did not intend to be in NATO, and had spent decades managing life next to a Soviet superpower that had already invaded it. Now Finland is inside NATO, Russia is fighting the largest war in Europe since 1945. The Baltic Sea has become a pressure point. The Arctic has become a pressure point. The Kola Peninsula, home to some of Russia's most important strategic forces, sits uncomfortably close to Finland's northern frontier. So Finland looked at its own law books and reached a very Finnish conclusion. This old neutrality statute is now a liability. Moscow is furious. Good. Hey friends, Wes O'Donnell here. I am a defense journalist, Army and Air Force veteran, and bad Russian speaker because mudro izuchat protivnika. And I would like to dispel a conspiracy theory right here and now. No, I am not Ewan McGregor. Hello there. Although I am his long-lost brother, call me Ewan. So Finland amends nuclear treaty law sounds like something you'd find buried between municipal zoning disputes in a parliamentary hearing on fishery subsidies. It has all the obvious dramatic appeal of watching a committee argue about Oxford commas. But this story is much bigger than the headline. For almost 3 years, Finland sat inside the world's most powerful military alliance with a leftover statute from 1987 that told Moscow something useful. There were still parts of NATO nuclear planning that Finland could not fully participate in, at least not without legal friction. Finland is now closing that door. To understand why this is a big deal, we need to go back to the world that created the original law. Finland's 1987 Nuclear Energy Act came from a very different strategic environment. Back then, Finland was officially neutral. It was not a NATO member. It was not part of the Warsaw Pact either, though. It lived in that gray strategic space historians call Finlandization, which is a polite academic way of saying we're a small democracy next to Moscow, and we very much like the tanks to stay on their side of the border this time. Finland had reasons to be careful. The Soviet Union invaded Finland in 1939. The Winter War became one of the great underdog stories of modern military history, with Finnish troops bleeding Soviet forces in the forest, the snow, darkness, and terrain that treated Russian logistics like a practical joke from God. It occurs to me that my Gen Z audience, all 4 of you, might need an explainer in your own language about the Winter War. Meet me over at Studio B. Okay, besties, quick vibe check. The year is 1939. Stalin looks at Finland, a small country minding its own business, and says, I would like some of that. Finland says, no. Stalin says, bet, and sends in the Red Army because he thinks this is going to be an easy W. That was cap. The Soviet Union rolled in with massive main character energy, expecting Finland to fold immediately. But the Finns had no interest in entering their flop era. They were cold, outnumbered, undersupplied, and still somehow had elite forest goblin riz. The Red Army, meanwhile, was giving deeply unserious energy. Their logistics were... Gen Z, you guys drink this? Man. Their logistics were cooked. Their officers had been purged. Their troops were freezing. Their tanks were stuck on narrow forest roads. Their whole invasion plan was basically, we have more people, so surely this slaps. It did not slap. Finnish ski troops started appearing out of the trees like tactical jump scares. They cut Soviet columns apart, ghosted it in the forest, came back, threw Molotov cocktails at tanks, and disappeared again. The Soviets were high-key confused, low-key terrified, and absolutely not passing the vibe check. Finland didn't win in the normal sense. It had to give up territory. That part matters. War is not a TikTok edit with dramatic music and a clean scoreboard. But the Soviet Union expected a quick little invasion. Instead, it got embarrassed in the snow by a country with fewer people, better fieldcraft, and the kind of national attitude that says, you may have tanks, but we have skis, darkness, and generational spite. No cap, Finland ate. And that, my friends, is the Winter War. Okay, back to Studio A before I lose everyone over 35. Forced goblin riz. They don't say that. Come on, they don't say that. Well, of course, I'll say it. It's the bit. How dare you, sir? I am a professional. Okay, we're back. We're back. That was invigorating, Gen Z. Thank you. Finland survived, but it lost territory. And more importantly, it learned. For decades after that, Finland built a serious military while avoiding anything that Moscow could use as a pretext. It kept conscription, it trained reserves, it prepared society for a crisis. But diplomatically, it walked softly because geography doesn't care about your preferred foreign policy. So the 1987 nuke law made sense in that world. It banned nuclear weapons broadly and categorically. No import, no transport, no possession, no manufacturing, no detonation, no carve-outs for future NATO obligations because there were no NATO obligations at the time. No break glass in case Putin gets weird clause, which in hindsight would have been a useful bit of legislative foresight. The point was to tell Moscow that Finland was not part of any Western nuclear structure. Then history moved. Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Finland joined NATO in April of 2023, and suddenly a law designed for neutrality was sitting inside of a country that had made the most important alliance decision in its modern history. That created a real problem. If NATO is a nuclear alliance and Finland is now a NATO member, then Finland has to be able to participate in NATO's deterrence planning in a credible way. That doesn't mean Finland gets nuclear weapons tomorrow. It doesn't mean American B-61 bombs are about to show up in a Finnish forest wearing white Saab multispectral camouflage. It means Finland's laws now need to allow the country to function as a full NATO member if the security situation deteriorates. Under the proposed amendment, nuclear weapons could be brought into or handled on Finnish territory in the context of Finland's homeland defense, NATO collective defense, or defense cooperation. Those phrases do a lot of work. Homeland defense, NATO collective defense, defense cooperation. Manufacturing nuclear weapons would still be illegal. Detonating nukes would still be illegal. Finland is not building a bomb. Finland is not becoming a nuclear power. It is removing a legal obstacle that could interfere with alliance planning during the exact kind of crisis when nobody has time for a legislative scavenger hunt. If Russia is testing NATO's northern flank, sabotaging undersea cables, pressuring the Baltic, threatening the Kola region, or trying to split alliance decision-making, Finland cannot afford to have its defense ministry, its justice ministry, its parliament, and NATO planners all staring at a 1987 statute like it's an IKEA instruction sheet, missing pages 6 and 7. Deterrence needs clarity on the Allied side and doubt on the Russian side. President Alexander Stubb has said Finland does not intend to host nuclear weapons in peacetime. The government is not saying, load the nukes and point them north. It's saying Finland should not have a criminal statute that prevents it from participating fully in NATO's nuclear deterrence structure. That puts Finland closer to the position of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Those countries have political policies against nuclear weapons on their territory in peacetime, but those are policies, not broad criminal bans. A political policy can change quickly during a crisis. A criminal statute takes more work, more time, and more public legal process. That difference is not academic. Imagine a crisis in the Baltic on a Thursday afternoon. Russian aircraft are probing NATO airspace. Undersea cables are being damaged. Kaliningrad is bristling. Russian state media is screaming about Western aggression. NATO begins moving forces, dispersing aircraft, and activating plans. That is not the moment you want a Finnish official saying, Before we do anything involving nuclear-related planning, can someone check whether this violates a statute from the Reagan administration? But if deterrence depends on somebody checking the Finnish criminal code at 2 a.m., you've already made the Kremlin's day easier. This is where the story becomes more than nuclear policy. This is about Finland becoming fully NATO. Finland joined the alliance because Russia made neutrality impossible. Putin wanted to intimidate Europe, and he got Finland in NATO. He wanted to scare the Nordic countries back into caution, and he got Finland and Sweden inside the alliance. He wanted a weaker northern flank, and he got a NATO border that now runs roughly 830 miles along Finland and Russia. That is one of the great self-inflicted strategic faceplants in modern Russian history, and that is a very competitive category. Finland's nuclear law change is another step in the same direction. It says Finland is no longer structuring its defense policy around Moscow's comfort. It is structuring its defense policy around NATO's ability to fight, deter, and survive a crisis. Russia understands that. That's why Moscow complained. Russia's argument is predictable. It says hosting nuclear weapons would make Finland a target. It says this escalates tensions. It says NATO is provoking Russia. Of course it does. Russia has spent years using nuclear threats as diplomatic punctuation. It has threatened NATO, it has threatened Ukraine, it has moved nuclear weapons into Belarus. We just talked about that on Monday. It has nuclear forces in Kaliningrad and across the Kola Peninsula. It has turned nuclear intimidation into background noise. Now, Finland changes a law so it can participate more fully in NATO deterrence, and Moscow clutches its pearls like an aristocrat who just discovered taxes? Spare me. Russia is not upset because Finland made Europe less stable. Russia is upset because Finland made Russian planning harder. That's the real complaint. An adversary likes constraints it can map. It likes predictable limitations, neutral countries it can pressure, alliance members with legal caveats, and seems that slow response. Finland is sewing one shut. That does not mean the amendment has no critics. It does, and some of the criticism deserves to be taken seriously. Some Finnish opposition figures argue the government is going too far by removing all domestic restrictions instead of preserving a peacetime ban with wartime flexibility. That's a legitimate debate the Finns are going to have among themselves, but a democracy should argue about nuclear policy. If your country is changing the legal conditions under which nukes could enter your territory, the public deserves clarity. Parliament should debate it. Citizens should understand it. This is serious business, not a procurement vote for slightly nicer office chairs. There's also a real difference between Finland can participate in NATO nuclear planning and Finland has opened the door to nuclear weapons on Finnish soil. The government's position is that the first requires moving the old statutory block. Critics worry the second becomes easier once that block is gone. That debate deserves respect in Finland. But the strategic environment has changed, and Russia changed it. Finland did not wake up one morning and decide nuclear ambiguity sounded fun. It watched Russia invade Ukraine. It watched Moscow use nuclear threats to slow Western aid under the BS guise of escalation. It watched hybrid attacks spread across the Baltic region. It watched sabotage, disinformation, border pressure, and intimidation become the standard Russian operating procedure. Then, Finland looked at its own legal system and found a relic from a world that no longer exists. So, it's fixing it. Finland made the political decision. Now, it's doing the legal cleanup that makes the political decision real. And that is often where deterrence either gains credibility or quietly leaks it. A speech can say Finland is part of NATO. A treaty can say that Finland is part of NATO. A flag can fly outside NATO headquarters. But if domestic law still blocks key pieces of alliance planning, then the integration is incomplete. Finland is making it complete. That's why this matters. Nuclear weapons are not about to roll into Helsinki, and Finland doesn't suddenly want a glow in the dark. The actual story is more serious. A frontline NATO state with an 830-mile border with Russia is removing an ambiguity that helped Moscow more than it helped the alliance. Finland knows exactly who lives next door. It has known for more than a century. It has fought Russia. It has lost territory to Russia. It has lived under Russia's shadow. It has watched Ukraine pay in blood for the West's slow learning curve. And now, Finland is making sure its own laws do not preserve a weakness from an era of forced caution. This isn't panic. This is not theatrics. This is national survival expressed through statute, which sounds boring until you remember that wars are often won or lost by the boring things: rail gauges, fuel reserves, mobilization tables, bridge weight limits, ammunition stockpiles, reserve training, and legal authority. And yes, whether your defense policy still contains a Cold War era "please don't be mad Moscow" clause after you've joined a nuclear alliance. Finland is done with that clause. Moscow can complain. It will complain. It has complained. The Kremlin complaining about NATO deterrence is like an arsonist complaining that the building installed sprinklers. The correct response is not to apologize. The correct response is to check the water pressure. And Finland just did. That is it for today, my friends. If this was useful, please like and subscribe. I cover this stuff 4 times a week here on video. For deeper analysis, I write on Substack. And if you want to support the work directly, YouTube memberships start about $3 a month. You get priority comment responses, custom emojis, and my genuine appreciation, which is worth considerably more than a 1987 neutrality statute and slightly less than a classified NATO planning document. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.